So, some thoughts came to me this morning. I feel like I've had to rethink some of my thoughts concerning the coming conflagration. Here's what I mean. For a long time, I have doubted whether Israel would actually use nuclear weapons. I don't know why I've doubted it. I guess I felt like that the power of Jehovah would do it all. But here's the thing. Before anybody jumps to the wrong conclusion, I'm going to go straight to the Bible first. And I'm going to show you something. And I've gone over this many, many times. It's Zechariah 9, verse 13. And we all know what is written in Ezekiel 38 and 39. When you see very clearly in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that the powers of heaven are brought down upon Gog Magog, Iran, Gomer, which is now Turkey, and those people that are now surrounding Israel right now. The powers of heaven being hailstones, lightning, meteorites, earthquake, a great flood. All of that is described in Ezekiel 38. Another thing that is described is how in 39, Ezekiel 39, how Jehovah said that he's going to strike the bow out of Israel's enemies, out of their, out of their left hand or the right hand. The other hand, the arrows would fall out of that hand. Now that is a figure of speech. What it means is there's going to be a severe equipment failure when they're coming after Israel. Now, when one just reads Ezekiel 38 and 39, you don't see nuclear weapons. You just don't. Unless there is something in there where he said he's going to send a fire on Magog. And those who dwell carelessly on the coastlands of the Mediterranean Sea, that would be the Italian boot and all of its European minions. Send a fire. All right. So let's go look at Zechariah 9 and verse 13. I have used the King James Version for quite a while. Let's use the International Standard Version this time. For I have bent Judah as if it were my bow. Okay? Loading it with Ephraim. And I raised up your sons, Zion, against your sons, Greece, wielding you like a mighty warrior's sword. Oh. So Judah and Ephraim are going to be a sword in Jehovah's hand, wielding against the sons of Greece. Who are the sons of Greece? Well, all of Europe are of Japheth or Japheth. Turkey was once Greece. It really was good. Do your homework. Do your geography, history. Russia is Greek Orthodox. Sons of Greece. Iran was even a part of the Grecian Empire. So was Syria. Against your sons, Greece, wielding you, Zionists. Who are the Zionists today? Who are well, the Jews in Israel are Zionists, obviously. But who is it that stands at the UN blocking the world condemnation against Israel over and over? Why? Because they are Zionists. Americans are Zionists. So, these two entities will be the sword in Jehovah's hand. You see? So he's going to load up Judah, his bow, with Ephraim, his arrow or his missile. Verse 14, Jehovah will appear over them. His arrows, his missiles will shoot forth like lightning. Now, and this is at the time of the blowing of the trumpet. So now let us go and look at a few things that are going on today. Now, as you know, all the while Donald Trump, President of the United States, is fulfilling American law by putting the American embassy in Jerusalem instead of Tel Aviv, that also fulfilling the will of Jehovah, Donald Trump at the same time is declaring that the American troops need to be brought home. And of course, according to news sources, that brought howls of protest from the Saudis, but only quiet protest from the Israelis. Why? Why is this? Well, it could be that Donald Trump knows the Begin Doctrine. In several publications, Israeli publications, the Begin Doctrine has been mentioned a few times again. Now, people who understand the Begin Doctrine realize that if Israel has to use the Begin Doctrine, you don't want to have your troops, your military forces anywhere around when that happens. Let me explain, folks. You see, it was the Jews in the United States that developed the United States nuclear technology. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion said that if, I wonder if I can find this. Yeah. It's in nuclear weapons in Israel. All right. Pre-Dimona, 1949 through 1956. Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, was nearly obsessed with obtaining nuclear weapons to prevent the Holocaust from recurring. Did you hear that? Let me repeat that. Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, was nearly obsessed with obtaining nuclear weapons to prevent the Holocaust from recurring. Now, when I talk about the Begin Doctrine, you're going to understand the connection between the Begin Doctrine and Ben-Gurion's obsession with nuclear weapons. He stated, what Einstein, Oppenheimer, and Teller, the three of them are Jews, made for the United States, could also be done by scientists in Israel for their own people. Ben-Gurion decided to recruit Jewish scientists from abroad even before the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War that established Israel's independence. He and others, such as head of Weizmann Institute of Science and Defense Ministry scientist Ernst David Bergman, believed and hoped that Jewish scientists such as Oppenheimer and Teller would help Israel. In 1949, a unit of the Israeli Defense Forces Science Corps, known by the Hebrew acronym HEMED, Gimel, began a 2-year geological survey of the Negev. While the preliminary study was initially prompted by rumors of petroleum fields, one objective of the longer 2-year survey was to find sources of uranium. Some small recoverable amounts were found in phosphate deposits. That year, Hamed Gimel funded 6 Israeli physics graduate students to study overseas, including one to go to the University of Chicago and study under Enrico Fermi, who had overseen the world's first artificial and self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. In early 1952, Hamed Gimel was moved from the IDF to the Ministry of Defense and was reorganized as a division of research and infrastructure. That June, Bergman was appointed by Ben-Gurion to be the first chairman of the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission. Now, that's a long read. I won't continue to read all the way down through there. But I will start now at the top. Okay, because we all know now that the French helped out, we'll look at Dimona 1956 through 1965. The French justified their decision to provide Israel a nuclear reactor by claiming it was not without precedent. In September 1955, Canada publicly announced that it would help the Indian government build a heavy water research reactor, the Sirius reactor, for peaceful purposes. When Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, France proposed that Israel attack Egypt and invade the Sinai as a pretext for France and Britain to invade Egypt, posing as peacekeepers, with the true intent of seizing the Suez Canal in exchange. France would provide the nuclear reactor as a basis for the Israeli nuclear weapons program. Shimon Peres, sensing the opportunity on the nuclear reactor, accepted. On September 17, 1956, Peres and Bergman reached a tentative agreement in Paris for the CEA to sell Israel a small research reactor. This was reaffirmed by Peres on the protocols of the Sèvres Conference in late October for the sale of a reactor to be built near Dimona and for a supply of uranium fuel. Israel benefited from an unusually pro-Israel French government during this time. After the Suez Crisis led to the threat of Soviet intervention and the British and the French were forced to withdraw under pressure from the U.S., Ben-Gurion sent Peres and Golda Meir to France. During their discussions, the groundwork was laid for France to build a larger nuclear reactor and chemical processing plant, and Prime Minister Guy Mollet, ashamed at having abandoned his commitment to the fellow socialists in Israel, supposedly told Aneo, I owe Israel the bomb. While General Paul Ely, chief of the defense staff, said that we must give them this to guarantee their security. It is vital. Mollet's successor, I can't read French. I'm sorry. Stated, I gave you, the Israelis, the bomb in order to prevent another Holocaust from befalling the Jewish people, and so that Israel could face its enemies in the Middle East. So basically, the bottom line is the French gave the Israelis a nuclear reactor. Now let us go to the top of the page here and read. It says, Israel is widely believed to possess nuclear weapons with an estimated arsenal of up to 400 warheads, which would make it the world's third largest arsenal behind Russia and the United States. You see, Israel is a greater nuclear superpower than either France or Great Britain. Its first deliverable nuclear weapon was allegedly created in December 1966, which would make it the sixth country in the world to have developed them. However, Israel has never officially denied nor admitted to having nuclear weapons, instead repeating over the years that it would not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons to the Middle East. Israel also refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we all know what that is. Okay, so I don't need to read any more of this. 400 nuclear warheads that Israel can deliver by submarine, by plane, or by intercontinental ballistic missile. Okay? Now, I'm going to see if I can find a little bit on the talk of the Begin Doctrine. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. I will read to you the Begin Doctrine here in just a minute. Well, I think I've kind of missed my opportunity a couple of days ago when I spotted it was either on the Debka file or the Jerusalem Post, not sure which. But in any case, I'm going to go ahead and read to you the Begin Doctrine. And I quote, on no account shall we permit an enemy to develop weapons of mass destruction against the people of Israel. We shall defend the citizens of Israel in good time and with all means at our disposal. Okay. Now, why is Donald Trump talking about pulling our troops out of Syria and bringing them home? Well, there are a couple of different schools of thought on that. One of them, my school of thought, is, who wants to have their troops in harm's way when Israel is about to use they have to. Thanks to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was a knife in the back of Israel by Europe and Barack Hussein Obama, Israel is going to have no choice. And with the pulling out of that particular nuke deal, that's going to happen, probably 99% chance going to happen, on May the 12th, which is the deadline for President Donald Trump to re-sign it. And it appears that he is not going to re-sign it because he cannot get the Europeans to negotiate a new deal with Iran. And so when that deal is invalidated, rejected, thrown out, what will the Iranians do? What they said they were going to do: restart their nuclear program. A few days ago, it might be a week ago now, the Israeli government flew several of its F-35 stealth fighter bombers over Iran doing test runs. It has been reported that the F-35s can go from Israel to Iran and back twice on one tank of fuel. The Begin Doctrine. You do realize what will happen if Israel is forced to do this. And it will be Israel that's going to be forced to do it. Now, somebody of all people, and I hate to even mention the name, an Israel hater, are right up there with the worst of them. And I read these people's articles just like I read everybody else's, because I want to know what is going through the minds of people. Right? Hal Turner, of all people, did a commentary this morning. And it seems like he may have figured something out. I will try to avoid his profanities, which he posts on his articles frequently. And he says, let's talk about why China and most of the rest of the world is screwed. I use different words. We're evolving into a global superpower with no global interests. Well, I'll read and you'll see what he's talking about, and it makes sense. But see, he's not, I'll put in the factors that he is missing, but you'll get the general idea. So he says, let's talk about why China and most of the rest of the world is screwed. But the USA is and will be continue to be fine. I don't agree with that assessment. Nobody's going to be fine during the day of Jehovah's wrath. However, when looking at it from not understanding what's about to happen, it's understandable why somebody would come to this conclusion. So he says, follow me back to 1946. Europe is ruined. China is still a backwater. The USA puts together an alliance that allows everyone within to trade goods into the U.S. without significant trade barriers. This allows for Europe to export their way back to prosperity after World War II. It gives them room to grow their economies beyond that which their somewhat depleted populations will allow. In addition to allowing the free flow of goods, USA becomes a security guarantor of the free world by using our Navy to police the world's oceans and enable low-risk and hence low-cost global trade. And that is true. That's true. But there was a condition. In order to deal with the U.S., you had to be on our side, helping to combat and contain the Soviet Union. That's also true. Essentially, the U.S. traded some of its economic manufacturing capacity for increased security and strategic assets to assist in the Cold War. Only one problem: we won. I don't know that's a problem. The Soviet flag went down in 1991, and we didn't really make any changes to the world order. George H.W. Bush tried to reinvent the system, and we booted him out of office after a single term. Since then, the people of the U.S. have voted overwhelmingly for candidates who focused on domestic rather than foreign issues. The system limped along for another few decades, primarily because of the USA's demand for oil and energy resources. Enter shale. I've often talked about shale and how it is a difference maker. Enter shale. Since around 2007, net U.S. energy imports have been in sharp decline because we discovered how to process shale into oil and natural gas. And boy, do we have a lot of shale. Within a year or two, the U.S. will become a net energy exporter, meaning we no longer, here he goes with his profanities again. I'll just replace it with something else. Meaning we no longer give a rip what's going on in the Middle East. Meaning we can bring our troops back home. Notice the institutional outrage over Trump pulling troops out of Syria. This is why they're terrified of the current world order collapsing. And poor old Hal Turner doesn't realize the reason the current world order is collapsing. It's not that the current world order is collapsing. It is that the current world shall collapse. To drive the point home, but for the past century or so, the USA has kept a naval carrier group in the Gulf Sea. The Gulf Sea? What does that mean? At all times to protect, should be in the Persian Gulf, at all times in order to protect Saudi oil supplies. But more recently, the past few years, it's only been there about 6 months out of the year. We are done protecting the world and getting nothing in return. Well, that's exactly what Donald Trump's been saying. As you can see by the foreign heads of state visiting Trump, Shinzo Abe knows he needs America's help. So he brings a $500 billion investment for U.S. infrastructure and manufacturing with him. Good play. Theresa May knows she needs America's help, so she offers to sail the Royal Navy's 2 brand new supercarriers with U.S. fleets and offers to share intel from Britain's intelligence services, who recently had their budgets doubled. Good play. Now, I have checked out most of this, and I think all of this is about accurate. Xi Jinping knows America is not going to help him. And of course, we sure have seen the evidence of that in the last few days now, haven't we? So he put everything on the table, from IP law to the trade deficit to product dumping to North Korean denuclearization, all so we wouldn't go in for the kill right then and there. That's the best play he had. Angela Merkel doesn't know or doesn't think she needs America's help, so she shows up telling Trump, if you do this, it will bring the end of Europe. And he hands her a $300 billion bill for services rendered. She didn't bring anything to the table. Bad play. That is indeed true. Donald Trump did indeed bring Angela Merkel a $300 or a $400 billion invoice when they had their meeting. People call it a fake invoice. I would not call that a fake invoice. So Hal Turner continues. He says, so where are we now? As previously mentioned, the U.S. is the least globally integrated economy by percentage of GDP. Folks, do you know where we're going with this here? What he's saying, and correctly so, is that the United States is the least tied to the so-called global economy. In other words, the U.S., out of all the nations in the world, can most afford to go isolationist. It's true. And for those of you who think that China could just dump their treasuries, it would be very easy for Donald Trump to just start having the Department of Treasury issue debt-free currency. Boy, that would really start something. All right, I will continue. He says, where are we now? As previously mentioned, the U.S. is the least globally integrated economy by percentage of GDP. We're evolving into a global superpower with no global interests. This is not a Trump thing, it's a geographic thing. And that's also correct. Because the United States, its GDP is not based upon one particular item like oil. For instance, what is it? I think it's 50% of Russia's GDP is based on energy. That's dangerous. The United States GDP is diversified. Okay? He's saying it's not a Trump thing, it's a geographic thing. It would have happened no matter who won the office. But with Trump, it's happening faster. When we leave the world stage, the world will go back to doing what it has done before we showed up to save them in the war. Namely, fighting over breadcrumbs. No other navy on the planet has the ability to protect the world's shipping lanes, much less the motivation to do so. At current build-out rates, the rest of the world's navy forces combined won't catch up with the U.S. until 2263. China doesn't even have a blue water navy, meaning they can't operate long-term outside of China's sphere of influence. If we stop protecting the ships that China relies on for food and for oil and for sending us trillions of dollars worth of... Here he goes again. I don't even know what word to replace this word with. Trillions of dollars worth of sex toys. How about that? And $30 microwaves that break 2 months after purchase. Their economy, government, and nation collapses. This is even assuming the Iranians don't initiate a war with the Saudis over control of the oil production infrastructure, which they will if we aren't there to intervene. What's more, the U.S. is the largest and wealthiest consumer import market on the planet, and since the Europeans forgot how to have babies back in the 70s, will remain so for decades to come. That's, of course, in the opinion of Hal Turner, not necessarily mine. China needs us to buy whatever they can sell because they simply don't have any other customers who can buy as much as we do. And the money they do get from us is leveraged into shadow loans handed out by the Chinese banks to anyone who can promise employment, not profit, and not a working product, employment, because if people have jobs, they're less likely to march in the Capitol and hang their politicians. Remember the Obama stimulus package, $800 billion, and all the corruption and wasteful spending that goes along with that kind of top-down spending? The Chinese government loans out that much money every 17 days. And even that doesn't work anymore. The average hourly wage in China has octupled in the past decade. They're 2 times as expensive as Mexico now. It's no wonder factories are reshoring to the U.S. and Mexico. They know the end is coming. The smart money is already out of the country. They're just trying to make it end in a way that the country doesn't implode. They only beat us on trade the past few decades because we let them. We're not letting them anymore. Globalization is over. Free trade is over. The rest of the world riding on America's back is over. Atlas is shrugging, and to many Europeans here, I'm not trying to be mean. I don't have anything against you, but you can't expect a free ride to last forever. And you guys really, really shouldn't have stopped having kids. Once your boomer equivalents retire and you don't have the tax base to pay for their benefits or the young consumers that drive the economy, you're looking at decades of stagnation, spending cuts, and tax increases Incidentally, this is why the EU is importing migrants as fast as they possibly can. Now, the last few paragraphs really have nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about. What's going on here is the United States of America really doesn't need the world anymore. The United States of America has enough oil. We have a surplus of oil now. The United States can go tell the world to go blow itself up. Not that the United States wouldn't be hurt by it, but it would be the least injured of all the world, of all the nations. So, in the eyes of someone who doesn't know what's just about to happen in the Middle East, what's the point? What is the point of having U.S. troops in the Middle East? And spending gazillions and gazillions of dollars, and for what? This is what Donald Trump said. At the same time, if the United States does do what it appears it is about to do, start pulling away from the world stage and becoming, I wouldn't say isolationist, but no longer being globalist, then that would force Israel's hand. In other words, Iran and Russia and Turkey think they're the big cheeses in the Middle East now. And that will force Israel to use the Begin Doctrine. Once again, the Begin Doctrine is, on no account shall we permit an enemy to develop weapons of mass destruction against the people of Israel. We shall defend the citizens of Israel in good time and with all the means at our disposal. Donald Trump knows the Begin Doctrine. He's been filled in. He has more Jews surrounding him than any other president since the country's founding. So he knows the Begin Doctrine. And I suspect he's probably told Israel, do what you've got to do. Do what you got to do. So what is the point of then having American troops in the Middle East if Israel is going to assert itself as the superpower of the Middle East? Folks, I hope you can read the handwriting on the wall. I'm going to give you one word. Tekel. That's right, it's a Hebrew word. Let's look it up, shall we? It means you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Who was that message sent to? Babylon. The king of Babylon. Europe, headed by the man at the Vatican, is modern day Babylon. It's over. Finished. So, as I've been saying, watch the middle of May very carefully. Donald Trump was talking about pulling American troops out in a matter of weeks as opposed to months. Well, we'll see if he follows through on that. I don't know if he will. But why weeks? Why does he want the troops out in weeks? Is it because he knows what's going to happen in the middle of May? Well, he was the one who initiated it to begin with the promise to put America's United States Embassy in Jerusalem. He knew that that was going to cause a great big kerfluffle in the world. Of course. But right is right and wrong is wrong, and he chose what was right. And the hell with the consequences. Now, to the world, to the rest of the world, the Begin Doctrine means this. Israel is going to survive, and the rest of the world be damned. That's essentially what it means. But that's scriptural. It is written. It is written in the prophets. Jeremiah 30. And Jeremiah 30 is the chapter before the chapter of the new covenant for Israel. Jeremiah 30 and verse 11. I am with you, says Jehovah, to save you, though I make a full end of all nations whereof I scattered you, yet I will not make a full end of you. Yes, folks, that means the whole world be damned, but not Israel. That's the Begin Doctrine, folks. And now I believe that Israel will use nukes to defend itself. As I pointed out in Zechariah 9, that Judah is going to be the bow and Ephraim is going to be the arrow. And his arrow will fall. That Ephraim and Judah is going to be a sword, a warrior sword in Jehovah's hand. Which means there's going to be a great big monstrosity of a war. Now, with that in mind, and I think maybe we have context for this statement in Ezekiel 39. Ezekiel 39 and verse 6. And I will send a fire on Magog, and among them that dwell carelessly in the coastlands, that's the coastlands of the Great Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and they shall know that I am Jehovah. So Jehovah, he's going to have a sword in his hand. And that sword is Ephraim and Judah against the rest of the world. So yes, Ephraim and Judah are going to rain fire. They're going to be the sword of Jehovah, and they are going to rain fire on Magog and those nations that dwell in the coasts of the Mediterranean Sea carelessly. You figure it out. You do your own studying and determine for yourself if my assessment is accurate or not.